So I'd now like to go to the Pride Award and call on Staff Sergeant Schoen to come forward.
Good afternoon, Police Services Board Chair, members of the Police Services Board, Chief DeCare, Deputy Chief Gert, Deputy Chief Wetherill, senior officers, members of the police service, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maggie Schoen, and I'm the Executive Officer to Chief Glenn DeCare. I am honored today to present the Chief's Pride Award. May I ask Detective Sergeant Paul Downey to please come forward. The Chief's Pride Award is given to members of the Hamilton Police Service and members of the community who go above and beyond normal expectations. These are special acts of compassion, support, and quality service that are worthy of recognition. Detective Sergeant Paul Downey will be completing 36 years of policing on July 30th of this year. His contributions have been extensive both internally with our members and externally to our community. In April 2014, a 19-member mental wellness working group led by Detective Sergeant Paul Downey was established with a mandate to review our policies, our procedures, supervision, training, and support systems. The mandate was then expanded to include input from our members addressing prevention, intervention, and postvention care. Numerous recommendations were presented to improve the ongoing support for our members, and it is now in the implementation stage. His work has been exceptional, but he has made an even greater impact in one life in particular. Paul Downey has made a significant impact on the life of Jeremy Pierce. Jeremy would have loved to have been here, but he's presently living in British Columbia. Jeremy has described Paul in this way. Mr. Downey perfectly embodies what I believe an officer should be. The famous Robert Peel saying, "The police are the public and the public are the police," is what he clearly demonstrates. He treats everyone with respect and equality, even when sometimes it appears to be undeserved. Mr. Downey shows how policing is not a job, but a lifestyle, willing to help others, even while off duty and at ungodly hours. I personally cannot put into words all that Jeremy has shared, so I'm going to let him speak for himself.
My name is Jeremy Pierce, and I'm an aspiring police officer. I was a 4-year student athlete at Simon Fraser University, starting on the offensive line for the only Canadian school participating in NCAA athletics. I maintained one of the highest GPAs on the football team while also being employed by the school's forensic entomology lab. I'm currently employed as a mental health worker in Vancouver and volunteer my time as a big brother, a Special Olympics coach, a mental health first aid instructor through the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and was recently recognized as a top 25 under 25 for my implementation of a community policing program with the BC Transit Police. Life wasn't always like this, though. I grew up in Hamilton with an abusive father and, to put it gently, a dysfunctional family. Drug use, drug dealing, an abundant amount of absenteeism ultimately led to what I suspect to be a drug-related home invasion, and then later, a suicide attempt. The night of my suicide attempt, Mr. Downey called me. His kind, caring, empathetic, non-judgmental voice convinced me to let him know where I was so that he could send the help that I so desperately needed. A relationship that had begun to be built months prior when his family would send me food care packages when I couldn't afford groceries. An award that recognizes people really interested in delivering excellence could not go to a more deserving person. Mr. Downey exemplifies the characteristics of an officer that I one day hope to be. Thank you for your support, and congratulations, sir.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. We appreciate your service to us and appreciate the exceptional video, and to have the member of the public who came from a troubled background explain that to us. So thank you. And I'd like to call on, no, I like check presentations. Call on Inspector Bullock to come forward for a check presentation.
Here. Good afternoon, Chair Ferguson, members of the board, Chief DeCare, deputies, members of our service, and members of our community. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today about an organization that's been very near and dear to the heart of the Hamilton Police Service and its members for over a quarter century. The Law Enforcement Torch Run in support of Special Olympics Ontario is the largest fundraising body for Special Olympics Ontario. With the support of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, as its banner charity of choice, law enforcement members, including police service and corrections staff, have raised over $22 million to support these awesome athletes. This year, the Hamilton Police Service has topped any of its previous annual fundraising, and by the end of the year, it's anticipated that our $50,000. This kind of results requires a huge commitment by our Torch Run Committee members, which is currently led by Detective Constable Kim Harvey and Constable Renee Grambois. But this year's results was because of Mystique Marketing, namely Chris McCullough and Chris McGuire, who approached Cody Jansma. Cody's here also today. Cody Jansma is the manager of Law Enforcement Torch Run Ontario, and inquired about organizing an endurance mud run in Hamilton, with the Hamilton Police Service being the partnering police agency. Needless to say, Chief DeCare and the committee jumped at the opportunity, and in fact, right off the bat, Chief DeCare volunteered to run with our athlete, Ethan Story. The event on June 12th, known as Hell in the Harbor at Bayfront Park, was a hit and exceeded all our expectations by raising significant funds for the athletes. Today, Chair Ferguson, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and the board Chris McCullough, Chris McGuire of Mystique Marketing, Ethan Story, our athlete, and Cody Jansma from Law Enforcement Torch Run Ontario. Our Special Olympics guest athlete who ran with the chief at the inaugural Hell in the Harbor. They're here to make a check presentation to Cody, the manager of Law Enforcement Torch Run Ontario. So let me just grab this big check. So the check was for $45,896, and that was for Law Enforcement Torch Run Ontario. Hamilton Police Service is the partnering police agency, and Cody Jansma is the receiver for Special Olympics. I want to finish off here. So in closing, Mr. Chair, I would like to present you with this 2015 Law Enforcement Torch Run Ontario t-shirt. Extra large. It's going to get you just a small, but you're a much bigger fella than that. There you go. And I'd like to officially invite the board and our community to two events. The final event in our 2015 fundraising schedule is our first annual Cops and Rodders. It's a car show at Bayfront Park on Sunday, August 16th between 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And the second, Mr. Chair, is to invite the board to go to Hell in the Harbor, Hell in the Harbor 2016 at Bayfront Park. And details will be found on the website, which will be known as www.hellintheharbor.com, and you'll be able to get all the details. In fact, as of about 20 minutes ago, you're going to get some more details, not only about the run, but some really exciting news about an additional fundraiser that will be attached to Hell in the Harbor that I know you're going to find exciting. So thanks very much for your support, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your support from the board, Chief DeCare, and our community. Thank you very much.
He's very modest. Floor hockey.
Floor hockey.
Yeah, from Ottawa last
Yeah,
in May.
very nice.
Goal scorer.
Are you a scorer? Yeah.
Tough guy. Yeah, he hits people.
Speed. Hits
Thank
people.
you.
Oh,
Thank
really?
you.
Yeah, he's got some heft for sure.
Thank you very much. Take Jazz on this side. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Inspector. $45,000 is a lot of money. And you have a lot of competition in fundraisers, and to get $45,000, I'm sure it took a lot of work. So congratulations again. Okay, on the recognition, at this time, I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate the Hamilton Police Service for being awarded the honorable mention for the 2015 Outstanding Achievement in Law Enforcement Volunteer Programs, recognized for having an outstanding volunteers in policing programs. So congratulations to all of you. I'd now like to move on to item 2.4, which is training and practices of the Hamilton Police Service on a bias-free policing, and call on Chief DeCare to introduce this issue.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the board. The Hamilton Police Service works to deliver public safety, and we do so guided by our core values and within the confines of the law. We meet the community's expectations to detect, to deter, and to disrupt crime, and we do so in compliance with the law, the Charter of Rights, the human rights codes, and we balance the fundamental tensions between public safety, the expectations of the community, and our diverse communities. And Deputy Chief Girt will take us through our history, the legal aspects of our work, and will take us to where we're moving forward in policing today. Deputy Girt.
Thank you, Chief. Chairman Ferguson, Your Worship, members of the board, senior officers, Chief DeCare, Deputy Chief Wetherill, ladies and gentlemen. Presentation today involves training and practices of the Hamilton Police Service on bias-free policing. The reason this is a difficult issue is the tension amongst the following expectations, which I'll lay out. It's not a question of one or the other, but a balance among all of the following expectations. Within our application of the law, we begin with the supreme land of the law, which is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or Part 1 of the Constitution Act, in here. In addition, we're governed by the Police Services Act, in here, and our core duties which are enunciated therein. In addition, in many of the requests we get in policing around not necessarily crime issues, but quality of life issues. It's as important and certainly makes up a broad portion of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, within the Act, crime prevention, detection, and deterrence, and also the apprehension of criminals. And lastly, and we've certainly seen in this area, persons in crisis and the issue of mental wellness. As you know, within our own program, we've been running the Crisis Outreach and Support Team, otherwise known as COAST, for 17 years. The Social Navigator program was implemented recently. And instead of enforcement with people who have a number of underlying issues, it can be homelessness, addictions issues, mental wellness again, it can be a broad variety. Our intent is to get them the help they need from social agencies and not lead them into the legal system. And lastly, of course, our most recent introduction this year in April, moving from a pilot to more permanent and funded by this board, the Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Team, which involves an officer and a mental health worker dealing with persons in crisis who have emergent needs. And this, of course, is funded both by the service and by the local LHIN. Just want to go over some of the definitions that have appeared through the course of time. With regard to street checks, and you can see the definition there, it's for police engaging with the community members.
Can I just interrupt for one moment? Normally we get overhead copies of the presentation. Is there such thing that exists, or we don't have to follow the presentation?
I have them. I can hand them out normally. That's normally what we do during our presentations in-house.
Would you like them handed out now or wait
Yeah, I
till
would
this
like to have it
presentation?
in front
That's
of me
fine.
if that's possible, so I can make notes.
Okay, we'll have Lois pass them out right now then. Is that the wish of the rest of the board too? Okay. Just hold up, Deputy, until they're handed out.
So we're on slide 3 for your purposes. So I believe everybody has a copy, if you're good, Chair.
Go ahead.
So for street check, the definition is police engaging with the community members for investigative purposes. And you'll see a number of these things that have appeared in the Action Annual Report. So this is why we're delineating them here. Community contact is face-to-face contact by police with community members while police are doing regular patrols or attending community events to promote and enhance healthy relations between the police and the wider community we serve. With regard to business contacts, they're regular check-ins with businesses to identify specific business needs related to policing concerns, in addition to fostering those relations. And our bail compliance checks, as you know, that's part of our unit within Community Mobilization Division, not specific to Action, but within that branch. And it's a service-wide crime prevention strategy to identify and monitor violent offenders through education and bail compliance investigations. As you know, this involves people who have been before the courts who are released on what are called judicial interim release orders, and we're ensuring that they abide by those conditions. With regard to policy and training within the service, many of these training initiatives date back to 2004, specifically for bias-free policing. But with regard to police questioning, we get that when we attend Ontario Police College at the inception of our careers. Community-based policing largely emerged in the 80s and became part of the Police Services Act in terms of what the province wanted in terms of how policing was administered. Investigative detention, a more recent term that's emerged. Search and seizure, again, back to the start of our careers and kind of our bread and butter in many ways. And it is important to note, as stated by the Chief, we do not train our members to participate in the random, indiscriminate stopping of any citizen for the purposes of identification, Also inherent in our values are the issues of cultural competency. Our goal, to value and respect diversity, both physical and cultural, and increase awareness internally. And that's within the commitment to public safety and service. Generally speaking, we serve all of the community. But we need the community's help to meet those goals. With regard to Police Services Act anti-racism policy, and I cited right from the introductory statements within that policy, you can read it up there. I do note that it does also embrace within Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, again, the Constitution Act. It appears in the Ontario Human Rights Code, not verbatim, but the principles certainly. The Police Services Act, Ontario Reg 268 for 10, and within our specific policy, which I cite here, our equal opportunity, anti-racism, and anti-discrimination policy. In addition, this is a core value within the business plan and has appeared for many years. We believe in the respect for and value of equitable treatment of all individuals in our diverse community. So going beyond statutory requirements, it's a value built into this organization. Also, our service acknowledges that racism, racial profiling, and other biases exist in policing. And again, that appears directly in print in the policy 1.21, equal opportunity, anti-racism, and anti-discrimination. So starting at the start, we obviously start with the supreme law of the land, as I mentioned, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and Part 1 of the Constitution Act, which we are sworn to uphold. And as you know, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. The significance here And I take you to ride lanes as they emerged after the Constitution was implemented and the challenges that appeared before the courts in relation to those. These are stops that are random and arbitrary, by definition. The courts have judged those reasonable limitation of the law because of the issue of public safety, specifically as it relates to traffic deaths caused by impaired driving. So my point is, Section 1 oversees the subsequent sections, and the courts have deemed through the Supreme Court that is a reasonable limitation in regard to that specific issue around traffic safety and deaths caused by impaired driving. Section 7, of course, speaks to life, liberty, and security, and the right not to be deprived, except in accordance. Section 8 speaks to unreasonable search and seizure. Section 9, which speaks about arbitrary detention or imprisonment. And Section 10, which we're very conversant with, 10A and B rights, as we call them, upon arrest or detention, you are entitled to be informed promptly the reasons thereof, or therefore, other reasons why did you get arrested, to retain and instruct counsel without delay and to be informed of that right, and C, and this deals with habeas corpus is bring the body before the court, is what the Latin term means, so that the body is brought before the court so that the judiciary can determine if that detention is lawful and if it should continue. And of course, the remedy sections under the Constitution Act 24(1) and 2, and I haven't cited them, they're more lengthy, 24(1) and 2 around the exclusion of evidence should those rights be breached. The reason I go over this, and you'll see in the subsequent slides, many of these slides are directly taken out of the presentation that was presented during action strategy training in 2010. Again, just to remind the intent of this strategy, it was part and developed out of our neighborhood safety project, and it is a strategy to address violence within the City of Hamilton. The goals of action are to reduce violence and disorder in our neighborhoods, increase safety in the community, and improve quality of life for all citizens in Hamilton. So during this training that I spoke of, and as I say, this is a slide taken right of that presentation, and you'll find in the case law, it's the same thing. Key concepts from the case law involved discussions around proactive policing, what it meant, and limitations, and what you can do. Community-based policing, the promotion of public safety, the reduction of crime. In addition, addressing the fear of crime. As we well know, crime and its impact is one thing, but persons' perception of crime can be equally important. Their level of feeling safe. Our intensified presence in high crime areas. And what I cite is some of the work that was carried on by Superintendent Shea in the implementation of our closed circuit television cameras. At that time, a contentious issue. We dealt with the Privacy Commissioner. I know that Mike dealt directly with Ann Kavukian, who approved the project based on the demographics, the higher crime rate in the downtown core, and the fact it was a small geographic area with a high crime rate. And all of those policies that were implemented were done in concert with the Privacy Commissioner at that time and continue to be used. It is non-adversarial, and it's intended as a constructive dialogue between members of the community and the police. It is deterrence through high visibility. As we know, part of the action strategy, the members are very prominent, often wearing yellow jackets or on their vests if they have them, says police directly on the back, wearing their hats, and if the public has a need, they're easily identifiable. We're not going about in plain clothes, we're making ourselves very evident. So with regard to police questioning, and again I remind you that this appeared in the actual slides presented to our officers, dates back to 1987 Court of Appeal ruling, Regina versus Graff, keeping in mind that this was tested just after the implementation of the Constitution Act. And the courts ruled that the law has long recognized that, although there is no legal duty, there's a moral and social duty on the part of every citizen to answer questions put to him or her by the police in a way to assist the police. In short, our officers can talk to people. It is not a deprivation of liberty. In fact, the public and the courts expect us to do this. Further, with regard to Graff, And I find the language interesting in this because it's a legal decision, but it talks about moral and social obligations. As you can see, implicit in that moral social duty, it's the right of an officer to ask questions, even if the court's opinion, when he or she has no belief that an offense has been committed. I'm sorry, that's in the officer's opinion. To be asked questions in these circumstances, and it's bolded, cannot be said to be a deprivation of liberty or security. Further, and you'll see that we cannot compel people to answer, and moreover, we have no power to detain a person for questioning if the person questioned declines to answer. The police officer must allow that person to proceed on their way unless he arrests him on reasonable and probable grounds. And once again, this was in the training back in 2010. So moving to that year, we had Regina versus Osborne, a Court of Justice in Ontario ruling. And again, you'll see the appearance of social duty in this quotation. It's about the prevention of crime, and it's complemented by the social duty resting on citizens to ensure the safety of their communities by assisting the police. Of course, I refer to, and it's been cited already today by Staff Sergeant Schoen, Sir Robert Peel's principle that the people are the police and the police are the people. There's an expectation of cooperative effort towards public safety. Further in Osborne, the courts speak to the issue of community-based policing and that non-adversarial constructive dialogue between members of the public and the police. And the police have the authority to stop and question a pedestrian, but not to detain that person, unless the detention is also permitted by law. And further, every citizen has a well-established right to refuse to answer questions asked by the police. I just draw your attention to the fact that crimes are predominantly solved through information. Even though we see all the CSI shows, predominantly it's information from witnesses, from involved people, even from accused persons. Forensics are an important facet, but we solve crimes through information. With regard to community-based policing, turn now to a Supreme Court of Canada decision in Ard versus Mann, Regina versus Mann. And here it speaks specifically to detention. A police officer may briefly detain an individual for investigative purposes if there are reasonable grounds to suspect. This is a major shift. Criminal Code talks about reasonable grounds, and it's defined differently. This is reasonable grounds to suspect. The threshold is lower. In all the circumstances that the individual is connected to a particular crime and that such a detention is necessary. And I'll go on to explain it. It's not quite as simple as that, it never is. But the courts turn their mind, such a detention will not violate Section 9 of the Charter. And in Regina versus Davidson, a Superior Court decision again in 2010, citing the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Regina versus Subaru. It confirmed that the police are provided reasonable latitude to investigate an occurrence without the contact between the citizen and the police constituting psychological detention. And I'll expand on that a bit. Detention does not mean that every interaction with the police will amount to detention for the purposes of the Charter. And that's under 10A and B and all the other Charter provisions. Even when the person is under investigation for criminal activity, asked questions, physically delayed by contact with the police, investigative detention does not mean that a detention is grounded the moment the police engage an individual for investigative purposes. In other words, your Charter rights under 10A and B do not kick in immediately, just the fact, and it's delineated here in the list. In Regina versus Grant, again a Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court of Canada held that a psychological detention is established, and here's an important point, where the individual has a legal obligation to comply with the restrictive request or demand, or a reasonable person would conclude that the individual had no choice but to comply due to the state conduct. In other words, how did the officer conduct themselves with that person? How did they view this? And further, again, it cited sections 9 and 10 of the Charter, that a suspension of the individual's liberty by significant physical or psychological restraint. That's what it's referring to in the Charter. However, we have to consider factors as well for the person who is being detained. Factors to be considered are, were the police just providing general assistance? Are we maintaining general order? Are we making general inquiries regarding a particular occurrence? Or are we singling out the individual for focused investigation? Further, other things will impact on how this is viewed, psychological detention. What's the nature of the police conduct, including the language used by the officer, the use of physical contact, place where it occurred, presence of others, and duration of the encounter. And in regard to the person stopped, what were their characteristics or circumstances, including their age, physical stature, minority status, court's verbiage, not mine, and level of sophistication. So now addressing the issue of street checks, which I think we've spoken to a bit here. It was implemented in 2010. It is retained in the records management system. As you know, and Minister Naqvi of the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, who oversees policing, is going to review the accountability, data retention, and collection to look at standardization. We've not seen anything yet coming from there. We look forward to that because that will be implemented province-wide. Our street checks help to identify associations between and among persons and vehicles. It's not just street checks on persons we put in. Often it's vehicles, of course, registered to people, and what are they doing in the specific area where they're noted. It's also used for the following criminal investigations, up to and including homicides, and I'll speak to that later. Crimes against person offenses and thefts. An important facet, it can be used to prove or disprove alibi evidence. Person says, I was here at this particular point in time, may substantiate their alibi. It can also eliminate persons as suspects or persons of interest. So again, it can take them out of the criminal equation, doesn't just pull them into. And we use it quite often to assist in missing person and vulnerable person investigations. In that case, we have sometimes transient persons who may live in Toronto or elsewhere, but come to Hamilton, are reported as missing in those jurisdictions. And really, where do you start with that for a person living on the street? Sometimes through these street checks, we establish a contact, we can find the person and allay the issues of the concerned family members or otherwise. Provide some brief examples here. First one I'm actually going to cite from the Toronto Star, and it relates to appeal example offered by Chief Evans, who was then chair of the OACP, Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and it should be a familiar example. So indulge me a bit, I'm just going to read the verbiage right from the National Post here. Consider the case of Cecilia C.C. Zhang, the little girl who on the night of October 19th or early morning of October 20th, 2003, was stolen from her bedroom in her family home. Again, this is Christy Blatchford. The details were harrowing. Somehow, from under the noses of her sleeping parents, someone had entered the North York house and taken the lovely 9-year-old. Toronto Police launched an enormous search and investigation. CC's parents, Raymond Zhang and Sherry Zhu, remortgaged their home in case it was an abduction for money and a ransom demand would come. Rewards were offered. But for months, there was no sign of the little girl, no breaks. Then on March 27th, her remains were discovered in Mississauga by the Credit River near a fish sanctuary. Discovery of the body brought the Peel Regional Police into the mix, and as it turned out on September 18th, 2003, 1 month and a day before Shishi disappeared, police had received a complaint about a suspicious car in the same area near the river. Because of the fish sanctuary, fishing isn't allowed, and alert neighbors frequently call police. The officer who responded, sure enough, found a car and in it 3 young men. She spoke to the 3, who said they were looking for a place to fish. They showed her the rods. She got their names and checked their identification. One of them was a young fellow named Min Chen, who lived in Scarborough and was a long way off his home turf. And the rods still had their price tags attached. The officer had no grounds to arrest or hold the 3, but there was something hinky about their story. As it turns out, Cece's parents had a tenant, a young woman, Police had interviewed her, and she told them only 2 people ever visited her at the house, a girlfriend and a boy she only knew as Ming. Now, police knew there had been a young man named Min, who only a month before had been within about 200 yards of where Shishi's remains were discovered. Other pieces soon fell into place. Chen's fingerprints were found on the outer edge of a window screen, and in July, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the little girl's slaying. But as Chief Evans said, the thing that allowed detectives to first place Chen in the area of the body was the officer's street check. It allowed police to interview his 2 companions that night, who confirmed that, yes, Chen was quite familiar with the area. They'd been there before. The street check, the carding, was the information that allowed homicide detectives to not only link this young man who lived in Scarborough to the Credit River dump site, but also to 2 potential witnesses who could testify as to his familiarity generally with the area. No wonder that on May 9, 2006, Chen, who was then 23, abruptly changed his plea and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In addition, and I can't speak to it, we have current homicides that I'm aware of where we have links between street checks or canvasses by action officers deployed after the scene that have had strong evidentiary value for those homicide investigations. And unfortunately, you'll have to wait till it's actually dealt with in the public courts, but we are aware of that. For a more specific example, on April 27, 2015, at 3 a.m., an officer in Hamilton stopped a male in the central area, taking note of clothing and description. An hour later, a male walked into a grocery store in Cannon Street West and brandished a knife and robbed the teller at the store. The same officer viewed surveillance video and noted the suspect's description and clothing. The person stopped earlier was the suspect and was also responsible for 5 other robberies. Similarly, and in probably one of the more dramatic incidents of shooting in our city, on March 28, 2015 at 3:52 p.m. in the afternoon, 2 males were involved in a shoot on Main Street East in broad daylight. I think many of you have seen the video of that, captured through a car cam in the middle of the day, and the suspects, as you saw them on that video. Action officers were deployed for canvass and contact with the persons of interest in that area. And as you know, the local councillor who spoke to it in the media, Councillor Green, asked for additional presence as well, which had already been implemented. Again, I would look to the public expectations of what we do when we're deployed in that area, and rather than just drive around the area, I think that the public would expect that we would speak to people, not just persons of interest, but people who may have information as witnesses to who comes and goes in that area, Main Street East and East Avenue, and who belongs in terms of living in the area, who doesn't. We find that out through speaking to people. At the request of the board, at last board meeting, here's the analysis on the street checks from 2010 to 2014 based on race. As you'll see, and overwhelmingly, 75% of those stops are white. I have the breakdown here by years, then I'll show the subsequent slides, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, the actual numbers, and then percentage-wise down here. So here's 2010, and the basic legend remains the same. 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. And as an average of those 4 years, appears on this slide. Keeping in mind that the number of people stopped in street checks is a fairly small sample relative to the total population of Hamilton. That's, of course, over 500,000 people. So I put up on the board here now the City of Hamilton statistics. And it's not, even though Stats Canada gathers them on the larger CMA, which includes parts of Halton and Grimsby, that has been factored out. We obtained this through the Equity and Access branch of the City of Hamilton, but it's drawn from the City of Hamilton statistics. This is actually the city proper. Further, and these are from Stats Canada, You'll notice this is a downtown urban growth area here. And here's the definition. It extends from Hunter to Cannon, from Queen to Victoria, and the commercial strip area of James Street from Charlton to the CN rail line to the north. As you see, the number is a little smaller, 11,590, and the percentages again change, 65% being white, and the distribution changes relative to the racial diversity. For Ward 2, here's the breakdown, slightly larger breakdown, 35,655 people, and again the distribution, predominantly white, and then you have the various breakdowns from South Asian down through to multiple visible minorities, again gathered from Stats Canada. Just as a reminder, through the action strategy, and I'm sorry to apologize those who've seen it before, but I still think it's pretty indicative of what has changed. We look at the violent calls for service in 2009 across the city, and then the change that occurred in the following 3 years. And just to quickly review again, 2009, 2012. And I do know that the statistics were just released, I believe today, I don't even think it's come up on the agenda yet, for the Violent Crime Severity Index statistics from Stats Canada for the period between 2009 and 2013, which represented a 34.8% drop for those 4 years on the Violent Crime Severity Index. With regard to accountability, when things are perceived that they didn't happen the way they're certainly articulated by the case law and by the Constitution, we do have the Professional Standards Branch, and we certainly encourage any intimation that a stop or an interchange was based in regard to racial profiling. We take those extremists seriously, have for years, through our Professional Standards Branch, because we want to know if this is happening. Of course, we've got the Office of the Independent Review Director. That can be accessed not through the police services, but directly, online, by letter, phone call, and it's not even funneled through our service if there's an issue around comfort with dealing with our organization or police organizations. The oversight for boards and ourselves, the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, the Special Investigations Unit, when there's been serious bodily harm or death, with an access to the actions by our officers. Of course, coroner's inquests, which we've seen, human rights, which I've mentioned, and the civil courts, criminal courts, which I've referred to extensively, and our business plan. So in summation, it's about public expectation. It's about a balancing of a number of needs and meeting the needs, whether it's the case, whether it's Constitution or case law, which we're guided by the law. We are law enforcement officers, Police Service Act and its statutory requirements, quality of life issues, our onus for crime prevention, detection, and deterrence. And if you look in the Act, crime prevention appears first because it's important. We'd rather prevent it than have to solve it. And of course, persons in crisis and mental illness. Subject to those comments, Mr. Chair, that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was a very thorough and detailed presentation you made to us. Some interesting stats come up on them. So first on the speaker's list is Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree. A very comprehensive report. Has there been a group that has met with the police services approximately 6 years ago and sort of went through the concerns about the stop, and there was a commitment made by police services to address the gap?
You'd have to tell me which specific group. We meet with a number of community groups through the course of time.
Has it been raised around 6 years ago from any group that they'd like to see the gap closed?
I can't specifically speak to that verbiage. I know that we've met with a variety of groups in relation to events that have happened within our service. Without context, I can't say if that specific item was raised. I suspect it was, but I can't answer you definitively without knowing who the group was.
So one of the charts, last charts, the summary of the demographics of Hamilton through Stats Canada, what was missing was the Aboriginal. And I noticed that on the other data that you collected in regards to street checks, you had Aboriginal, yet I couldn't find it on the City of Hamilton breakdown.
That's correct. That's an issue. Statistics Canada captures the statistics this way. We haven't altered them. We've taken it right from the source data with Stats Canada. They don't collect them. We, of course, do collect them. And I do know there are other studies out there through other organizations who are looking at what the distribution is in Hamilton. But we weren't able to get those stats from Stats Canada. Would have been helpful.
The other question I have is the next chart. Where you, that chart, the City of Hamilton statistics. So
Which is Ward 2, right?
That's right, I want to see the overall city.
Okay, so that's downtown, and that's the overall city.
So I have the population of the white population being around 84%, 84.3.
That's correct.
And then obviously around 15.6, I guess, is the visual minority population. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then you've got another that they didn't report on. I did check into those and how they capture it. It can be a weighting error that they round up and down, and it can also be other persons who don't necessarily fall into those specific categories.
So understanding that the visual minorities, the number is around the 15% number. In 2010, there was 25% of those visual minorities stopped when there was 75%, which was below the ratio of the percentage of people represented in the City of Hamilton. So I just want to go through this first. So it's the same question, but it's for every year. So in 2010, even though we're showing 84.3% white, 75% was street checked, 25% visual minorities were street checked.
Follow along the year, if you like.
Which is above that 15.7 number for the breakdown of the city. 2011, 76%, again, below the demographics of the whole city, and yet disproportionately the visual minorities were 24%. In 2012, again, 25%, 75 white, 25%. 2013, 75, 25. So I guess there's a theme here that there's a disproportionate amount of visual minorities relative to the demographics in the community being street checked versus whites relative to the population and the demographics of the city. In 2014, interesting enough, and I guess I need to understand what took place, it went up with the whites 80% and dropped to 20% for the visual minorities. Can you explain what has transpired in 2014 to make that adjustment?
You'll see a couple of things relative to that. I'm not sure you've got multiple questions in there because you provided a broad direction. If you'd like me to answer this specific question, I will, and then return to the broader question that you're asking.
Okay, so I want to highlight those stats because what it tells me is that there's a disproportionate amount of visual minorities being stopped in the street checks versus whites based on the demographics of the city. So the first question is in your presentation, and I appreciate the chief's comments that we don't train people to be discriminatory or et cetera. You do all the values and core values, and yet the numbers. Is there a gap between the training and what is actually taking place on the street? Maybe that is the first question.
Okay, I'm not sure because I've had about 4 questions to date, and I'm happy to answer them. But if I bounce around, quite frankly, if I can answer, it's going to be very difficult to go back to questions that were asked 5 minutes ago. So perhaps I can answer your first question, which is around 2014. That's up on the slide.
Yep.
You'll notice the group is quite a bit smaller, 188, the sample size. Quite frankly, I think that's the chilling effect that's gone on relative to street stops across not only Canada but North America. Quite frankly, we're not in favor of that. You've seen the reason why we do what we do. The distribution over the 4 years has fundamentally not changed that much, other than, as you note, in 2014, it has a larger percentage of white, but you got to look at the totality. With regard to, I think that's the 2014 question, with regard to the synopsis that, and let me just move slides here. This is the population, but again, this is the city of Hamilton that includes outlying areas which include Flamborough, Ancaster, Stony Creek, the totality of the population. And in fact, I didn't include this slide, but you'll see a different breakdown if I go to larger CMA, which is the way Stats Canada gathers it. Because of course it includes Halton, Aldershot, and some others. It's the way they gather it. We were able to look at, I think, a more relative or a more important relationship to the downtown urban growth area. As you know, the majority of our stops are done, actually all of our stops are done by the action officers. They are deployed in the downtown core. You've mentioned this a number of times. We do have other areas where we disperse both for canvases, hot crime areas, problem areas, goes across the service. But predominantly, they're in the downtown core. And you've seen those statistics in the reports on the action distribution. This is, again, people defining their own ethnicity based on a questionnaire that they're compelled by law to answer. So we have probably very good numbers here with regard to self-identification. On the street, the sample is going to be somewhat different. Our officers have to rely on speaking to the person, observing visual characteristics. They may be able to infer cultural characteristics. That's dangerous game. And they may or may not know the ethnicity of the person. Certainly asking them that, or their socioeconomic status, I think would probably be fairly insulting. So the reliability of those statistics relative to Stats Canada are going to be a little different. And as you can see, this distribution is quite a bit different than across the city, as is Ward 2. They're very different. And I think contextually it's an important thing to keep in mind. I understand your argument. This means this relative to the city. I think you have to look at what are the distribution in the representative area. We haven't had time to actually map that in terms of Stats Canada. They don't actually produce results this way. It took some effort to get this. They don't release them this way. They release them just by the CMA, and that involves purchasing a license for Stats Canada and a whole bunch of other things.
I appreciate the challenge,
okay.
Stats Canada.
Right.
So help me understand that. So what helped to match up with what you've done here? And you said majority of the streets checks are in this corridor. Do we have a breakdown then of the number of street checks in each geographic area of the city?
No, and that would require a search, which would be fairly extensive with the numbers that you've seen and the number of stops. Let's say 2013, if I've got 3,000, I may have to go through those hand by hand to determine the area, locate them within a certain geographic district. They're not designed that way by geocoding, by some kind of GIS system that automatically through the street check delineates it, which is not the case with our computer-aided dispatch information. That's obviously rooted in a GPS system. We can locate those calls where they happen, all that stuff. The street check, I don't think, was ever intended to look at that. Quite frankly, the gathering of race-based statistics is contentious. This board has approved it for this purpose. We don't normally get into this business.
So then maybe the next, the other side of that question then is if we have a demographic, majority of it is downtown are in this geographic area, and it's difficult to map it out through the whole city. I got to think that it'd be very easy to map out what percentage of street checks have taken place in this corridor.
That's a different system. Stats Canada, of course, relies on your address to do that mapping of the statistics for this breakdown. When we stop persons, we'll have a location, but as I said, we don't have a way that it automatically enters GPS. It gets funneled with, they're called geocode numbers, the way we delineate where that event happened. It's not collected that way. What we're trying to do is, where we have an incident, you're looking at either the person or potential specific location, and that would have some relevance to the officer's investigation.
So is it safe to say then it's anecdotal information that you base that majority of them are taking place in this corridor, or is it based on numbers that you have that I just haven't seen?
No, because the street checks are done by the action officers, are not done across all the divisions. It's where the action officers would be deployed. So I think the logical argument follows.
Just one more question. Again, back to the comments that we don't train our officers that way, and I believe that is in fact the case. I think we have some of the best officers in North America. But doesn't mean it necessarily the training translates to the implementation in regards to the street. So what I'm seeing again is, even though the numbers change a little bit if you concentrate in the core, and I recognize that clouded issue with the broader city, I'm looking at the black community. I'm looking at 3.2% representation citywide. What is it in that corridor? It's
about 8%.
In that corridor?
As it is for the downtown core.
Again, I have 12% in respect to the average of street checks.
And again, it is difficult to draw an exact conclusion. This is a more broad analysis, and it doesn't pretend to relate the two directly. Reason being is statistics weren't gathered the same way in both studies, so you can't do a definitive line-by-line comparison. But it does give you a broad overview of what's happening. Certainly, if, let's say, the 73% were a particular ethnicity there in this green portion here, I think that'd be clearly evident where you have a disproportionate amount. Our other difficulty in the downtown core is that people either are coming to work, they may be there shopping or doing other things. We have a transient population who may not reside there. To quantify that, and I know that some agencies have been wrestling with this, both with regard to homelessness, addictions issues, other approaches, certainly Code Red, all those type of things. To get that definitive, of course, I mean, I'd be happy to have it. It would certainly assist us. This is kind of the best method that we have at our disposal currently.
That's another question. Then when I look at the downtown numbers, they're not necessarily representative of what's taking place, because just because there may be more street checks taking place downtown as a result of the action, many of those individuals could be from, like you said, Toronto or other areas of the city. Is that
That's correct? Yep.
Okay. Is there a approach moving forward to first of all, do we believe that there's an issue in regards to disproportionate amount of visual minorities being street checked? I guess that's the first question. Do we believe there's an issue?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me for a conclusion relative. I think what we presented you is the facts, and certainly for the public, they can draw their own conclusions. And if you're asking my personal opinion, that's one thing. But relative to service, it certainly would require more in-depth analysis. It may require a 4 or 5 year study to actually pin down the things you're talking about, because quite frankly, we can't. On a broad analysis, am I seeing disproportionate? Some of the things have been said in the media elsewhere, which, as I noted earlier, you know, is this a particular ethnic group that's 75%? We're not seeing that. If you go back to the previous slides, like we're looking at fairly similar items here, in my opinion. Can we drill down on this? Certainly. Do we have the capacity based on race-based statistics? They're not readily available for a variety of reasons, either through stigmatization or decisions by either Stats Canada or other organizations that we don't want to capture the statistics that way. If you're asking the service to become that statistician, that's a different issue. But can I draw specific conclusions? I think you have to draw your own conclusions here.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the latitude. I think I've asked pretty well every question I could possibly ask from every angle, and I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, and you're right. You did say last question, and you asked 6 more. Okay. Member Levy.
I'm glad you brought up at the beginning of your presentation, in your presentation, explicitly condemn any police practice that may have a discriminatory impact on any member or section of the community, including specifically racial profiling. This is not a matter of board policy, but as you stated, law. Policing must be carried out in a manner that fully respects and implements obligations under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Ontario Human Rights Code. Practices are consistent with this understanding are essential to promote legitimacy of policing as well as public trust and confidence in it. In preparation for this meeting, I gave careful consideration to Sir Robert Peel's principles, which lay out the clearest, most succinct terms, the philosophy of policing by consent. There is no clearer statement of what policing is in a democratic society and what it's supposed to be about. And so when I think about those words from Robert Peel from 186 years ago, it still applies today, that the police are the public and the public are the police. The ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent upon public approval of police existence, actions, behavior, and the ability of the police to secure and maintain public trust. The police must secure the willing cooperation of the public in voluntary observance of the law to be able to secure and maintain public respect. Understand that there is a clear understanding under Section 42 Mountain Law of what the responsibilities of the police have to ensure as the board that we are obeying all of these others' law and that we're not trampling on people's rights. Thank you for this report. Now, having said that, I have some questions here. So the street checks. 2010, 2011, 2012. So I went back to the action reports, and I found in 2013 a list of street checks. So I just need to understand what these numbers here mean of 2,432, and you've laid out in 2011, as what was published in the street checks of the Action Strategy Annual Report of 2013. So I have here in front of me street check of 2010, total May to December, and it says 4,241. So I look at 2010, then there's, I go to 2011, and there were 5,423, and 2012, I see 4,803. And this is, you've delineated everything that you said about the action report. And then I see 2013, I see 3,684, and I see a different number there. Then I went, and then also you were very, very thorough, and you put Hamilton Police Action Report, and there was a mounted unit statistics where you had identified a street check of 230. Then I went to the 2014 report, and similar format, everything's the same format, but when I'm looking at it now, and it's an oversight, that line item is completely missing. I have it here. I mean, I have action, arrest, and all of that. So I don't have that number, and then I see a number here. So a couple of things. Why is there a discrepancy in those known numbers? Yep. That's the first question. And is it because you didn't capture? And so the word for the card or the form, is that called a community safety note? Like, what do you call it when you write up the information? Because I don't know the language for that.
It's a street check that was provided, the definitions. I do have an answer for you for all that, by the way. So, if you'd like me to answer, but if you'd like to finish, go ahead.
Oh, so that's it. So I want to know what that form, because I see that Toronto has a different form. They call it community safety notes, and they write that up. So for this purposes, you call it a street check form? Like, is that what gets
It's a street check.
debt?
Street check.
Form.
It's a piece of paper.
When you ask them their name and their ID, all of that stuff,
That's correct.
So can you explain just the differences and why it's listed as a street check?
Yes.
It wasn't because
Yes, I can.
the information wasn't captured. So
Yep.
that's my first question.
And having done the research on this piece, and obviously I found that as well, so I made inquiries as to why, and this is, remember, it's a year-end report done 2 years ago. It's not in the context of what the request is. Our information on this slide, this involves persons. So if there's duplicates, they were taken out. If it involves 2 officers submitting, for example, the Divisional Land Action, when he went in to get these statistics, went into the logs that the officers put in. So if I'm walking with another officer, we do a street check, one street check goes in, they each consider it street check that they did. So that was the way it was gathered. That's why the duplication of numbers. Also, again, this slide that's up on the board currently involves actual persons stopped, verified, the determination of racial context for that stop, how it's described, all that type of stuff, and then verified in some cases through photographs or something that we had to say this is that person, and duplicates eliminated. So in the annual report where you first appeared it, and that's also what was published, I believe, by the CBC, that involved those street checks the officers did. They counted it that way. Now that we're getting more granular here, we wanted to make sure that we're based in persons, not just numbers that might have been duplicated, and that was the case there. I did quite a bit of exploration to find that out.
So in 2010, there were that number of people, the 4,000.
No, there weren't.
It says here 4,241 people, so they weren't stopped?
No, it says checks.
checks, so they were checked.
No, that's the differentiate I'm making. Check could be counted twice by two members who stopped the person, said on my log, I did a check, I did a check. It's just the way it was pulled out from the statistics for that year-end report. Whether that was intentional or not by the analyst, probably not a good idea. They didn't delve into it. We dove into it through the records management system. We physically looked at the cards, verified how many checks were there. Pieces of paper entered into the system. This is how many checks. I don't think that somebody sat down and actually counted the 4,000 physically in the paper. They gathered them indirectly through the logs where the officers had submitted. That's the reason for the disparity.
My question is, so why was it left off the latest? No line item at all for it. So can you just explain how many have there been done?
Yeah, and I don't know why it was omitted from that year. I don't. Obviously, it was included in previous years, and we've shared it with the public previously. And you'll notice that there are many other things, community contacts, business checks, all those things.
So going back to this year, we're saying that we went from 1,816.
Actually, if you refer to the slide up the top, those are the accurate numbers.
No, it's the, yeah, so we had, in 2014, we've only had.
That's correct.
What's changed?
And I believe I answered the question earlier when I said it was a chilling effect by virtue of the public attention around this issue. We certainly don't support that because we believe in the utility of these checks to get people to do that in compliance. So we talked about learning and the compliance with behavior. I think we all face that challenge in our workplaces, and this is what's happened.
I have another question about, so we talked about, you mentioned in the beginning about the minister is going to be putting down information about retention. So even based on these numbers, which are different than the 18,000 that was reported in the report up to 13, which is street checks, we still have the issue of 9,000. Mm-hmm. And in the absence of this policy that's coming around retention, I'd like to just ask you about these 9,000 is how long is the information stored on an individual? And with information that has no significant benefit, non-criminal, how long do you keep it? And how is it purged? So you've got 10,000 or 9,000 in a database, and so just to I just have those questions because that was one of the things that I had asked at the next meeting. So can you just tell me how long the information is stored on the individual, with information, and in particular, what I'm interested is not criminal, because I think because maybe it's been defined because you didn't define for me a clear public safety purpose. I don't have a definition of that. But with a clear public safety purpose. But I'd like to know how much.
And currently they're stored according to our records retention policies, which are mandated by the board and under the bylaw, and they are kept. To your other question about when do they become relevant, which I think is your question, how do we determine when it's relevant or not? And I think in the Cecilia Zhang example that I provided, you don't know until it may be a year, 2 years, 3 years after the fact. So the relevancy of that information, let's look at that specific case. We've got 3 gentlemen fishing by a fish sanctuary. It's a Fish and Game Act offense potentially. That draws a correlation between those 3 individuals that ends up being a pivotal piece of information in a homicide case. Now, not all of them are like that, and many of the street cards will ultimately serve no purpose. I get that. You don't know what is relevant and what is not until you find it later. And I just draw your attention back to the uses again, if I can quickly scan through here. And as I stated, we do see identifications among persons and vehicles. It is used for all those investigations. And it can eliminate suspects and missing person and vulnerable person investigations. We may not know for a year, 2 years, 3 months, 6 months. I don't know the relevancy of that information. It can be pivotal. The problem is if it's buried in an officer's notebook and there's no way to correlate it other than the officer stumbling upon whatever the issue is, there may be no way to correlate that information. To your point about where this information goes, Keep in mind that if a person comes in and does a criminal check or a vulnerable sector screening checks, street checks are not included in that. Similarly, we've been leaders in this in terms of VS, I'll call them VS checks. When Barbara Hall came out through the Human Rights Commission a number of years ago, particularly around the mental wellness piece, she had rules prescribed. We adopted those rules before other organizations did. In fact, we sit on a provincial committee that looks at those rules relative to vulnerable sector screening checks. Those rules were adopted by us a number of years back, and they were then adopted province-wide through our representation on that committee and became the norm. So we're certainly conscious of that. Also, you have to keep in mind that when a VS check or criminal check is done, it's not issued to an employer, it's not issued to a third party. You have to come in with your identification as the person who submitted. You get the VS check. Whether you disclose that or not is a different issue. And if you take issue with the information that is on that VS check, largely around mental health issues, you have the opportunity to come in and discuss that, whether that's relevant or not, according to our parameters, with the records supervisor. We've done it a number of times, and I'm aware of those. There are opportunities to do that. So there's a whole framework in place to look at what that means. But VS checks or street checks are not included in VS checks or criminal checks.
Getting back to that question around information that really is non-criminal activity, why would you keep it? You know, and then I have and that correlation to it when there is a stop on the street, when the officer, they have the understanding that this isn't going to lead to any kind of non-criminal activity in that stop. Does he disengage from that? But if you've collected something that has that information on it, how does that get purged? Doesn't state. I mean, there could be some individuals that have been stopped 6 times. So how does that, or 5 times, whatever? How do you get that expunged? So give me an example of how you would get these these 9,000 expunged.
Well, expunged is a different term.
Or purged. It's called purged.
Well, we would keep them according to the records retention schedule. We've talked about that, and you mentioned it. Minister Yakvi is looking at those standards across the province, which we look forward to. He's going to be faced with the same challenges. To your point about when does it become insignificant or not, quite frankly, we don't know off the top. It can become very significant a year, 2 years down the road. So if you make the determination after 3 months or 2 hours or 24 hours, whatever it is, that it's expunged, then you may lose the utility of that information. Often the investigations don't pivot on it, but it can be an important lead. It can be other things. And towards permanent records, it's not like an incident report. Those have purging dates, but they're retained for a long time as well, incident reports. That's a whole other discussion.
So have there been cases where a lawyer or someone has gone and had their records expunged?
They can make an application through FOI to get what the records are that we have on that person. And of course, that's with the Privacy Commission and under all the regulations that apply both on an MFIPA, the Municipal Freedom Information Protection Privacy Act, and other acts at the federal level. Those will all kick into place.
I'm glad we made that statement, because there are people out there that may have been stopped and feel, whatever information is on, in retention, could make an application, and I hope it's, easy enough to sort of, do that they have an opportunity to get those records purged. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the training. So in terms of that, you went through all of the training that you do, all of the codes, all of the human rights, all the opportunities that people get trained in. So is there in place an operational plan? So is there, we have policies, and the board has policies. You have policies on perimeters, standards of whatever, things like that. You have a cookbook recipe that we open up to a page and we can pull it out, and every officer has the same standard that they have to follow. Is there something in place that is specific? Because it is public interest and it is about public trust, and someone gets stopped, they're someone that may have been studying at a coffee shop at 3 o'clock in the morning or somewhere in a building, and they're out at night and they're going to get stopped, or they may get stopped. So what is that operational plan in place that every officer, so there's no subjectivity, so they know, they have a clear understanding of public safety purpose, they understand. And the other thing is in the training is when in the course of that contact are they told that they don't have the right to they have the right not to continue. Understand that they're told of their rights. So my first question is around the training. Is there a standard manual, training manual that that we could all see? Take a look at it if we're following proper process, or not. So is there this that they have in their toolbox along with all their paraphernalia, their tasers and everything we have? Is there that operational command, that street check procedure they can reflect on when they engage that person?
Yeah, and I see three questions. So the first question is there a policy specific to street checks? The answer is no. With regard to relevancy in that policy, and I think you'll see that it's a fairly subjective issue. If we look at, again, the Cecilia Zhang issue, would you include Fish and Game Act offenses should go in? Probably not. Should minor offenses relative to Highway Traffic Act offenses or other things? Quite frankly, when you have a Highway Traffic Act offense, you've got a person identified, usually their valid driver's license or their offenses that flow from that, and there's ways to verify that person's identity. So the subjectivity of what is relevant and what is not relevant, you have to keep in mind that much of this information is lower level. If there are crimes committed, we're going to take action on that. I'm not submitting a street check. I'm going to take action relative to my duties and obligations as a police officer. So no, there's not a policy. Two, I'm not aware of policies with regard to street checks in other organizations, and that begs a separate question because, of course, we want to do a best practice review. I would fully expect that the ministry is going to do that given what Minister Yakvi has said. So before departing along that path at a local level, I would see that we'd probably do it at the provincial level. They've undertaken and stated they're going to do that. So again, relevancy of the stop, the situation, be very difficult to be prescriptive about this meets the threshold, this doesn't. Quite frankly, it can be innocuous information quite often.
And then the other question about their rights. So when in the course of the discussion, because I went and looked at the pamphlet, and I have that pamphlet from months ago. It's not so easy to find on the website, but I'm glad to see that you have an app. So, but I think if someone has a street check and they go to reach their phone and pull it out, that might be deemed suspicious. When in that, to know their rights, when does it come that point in that stop that they're apprised of those rights? And once, if they decide to disengage, how does that change? What is the training in place so that the tone of the officer, it doesn't become sort of a situation that we now find suspicious behavior?
And I'll answer both. During the training, I know I spoke to corporate counsel. He was explicit, and the reason you've got all the case law that you do, and keep in mind the original presentation was 124 slides. Quite frankly, I didn't want to get you through death by PowerPoint. I did pare it down to, in my view, very salient aspects of what we're doing and obligated to know. It's not a simple answer, as you tell by the Supreme Court wrestling with these specific cases. When is the threshold met? That's why we reviewed psychological detention, which is subjective. Why we reviewed when do your 10A and B rights click in. If you do just a very basic reading of the Constitution, you would think it's something. When you read the case law and you read the Supreme Court decisions, there's textures to that. When does it kick in? This is really the trade we do and what we're obligated to do. I know that relative to counsel, he was specific on if it says and you have no reason to detain and they say I'm leaving, then you say, see you later. Don't get upset. They have that right. If you don't have the grounds, you're going to get yourself in a world of hurt if you push the issue and you don't have the grounds. So specific in that training, I realized it was a little drier academic, so to speak. The context that went into that training was cases that our corporate counsel dealt with, and he deals with both discipline and civil suits and coroner's inquests. He's very much alive to the issue about when it goes bad, why did it go bad? And you'll see in some of these cases as well, of course, I couldn't give you all the circumstances. It's cases where officers may have pushed it and then lost evidence. In some of the cases, it involves handguns that were retrieved off individuals. That got excluded under 24A and B because it breached the Constitution. Does that meet the threshold of civil suits and those things? We're certainly alive to those issues. The board doesn't want it. We don't want it. So it was explicit in the training, continues to be so.
Having only seen this report for the first time today, I'm unable to do careful, analysis, detailed scrutiny on an issue that is by public and, us. So if
It's up to you. You can do it later, you can do it now. I know I want to speak on it.
Anyway, thank you, Eric,
I have
for
some
that.
questions. I know the mayor has some questions too. So, Member Levy, can you just take the chair for 1 second, and then I'll come to Fred. I'm sorry, the mayor. Mayor Eisenberger. Deputy, just one question, then some comments. It is a radical shift from 2011 of 2,893.
Sorry, I'll go back to that slide if you like.
Then down to 188. I've heard the question asked twice. Why? And I heard your answer is it's a chilling effect. What's that mean?
Sorry, pull the slide up, please.
It's one that shows that you had 9,000 checks,
There you go.
but only 188 in 2014. Is it a chilling factor on the officers? They're worried about the profile of this, so they're not doing it anymore? Is it a chilling effect on the public? I wasn't sure what that meant.
Within the context of world events, I don't think it'd be a huge leap in logic to state that. Obviously, I'm drawing as a personal opinion. I don't have a factual basis for it. You've asked me my opinion. I provided that. And that's why I say the chilling effect.
It's getting the chill.
Quite frankly, the officers, if they feel that they're going to be held to task within this law, that they're not going to be supported by the public to do the job that's detailed, and I spoke about the tension. So you've got the constitutional rights in the one half, you've got the obligation of officers to go and ask questions that other people may not. I'll use a quick anecdote. If you think about the number of incidents that are reported by off-duty officers, why is that? It's because they look at a situation slightly different based on experience and think, something's out of place there, whatever it is. The situation, the behavior, whatever it is. So this becomes...
Why they get that chilling effect. And our
Correct.
delegation last month said that, in their view, the bulk of the street stops are people of color. But your stats don't play that out. 75% are white.
That's correct.
And I found that interesting statistic that you're making in public now, so I believe it's factual. And there's not a huge disconnect between the population and the people who are actually stopped. As Councillor Whitehead pointed out a little bit, but it doesn't show a disproportionate or a large part of the people who get stopped are people of color. So I found that an interesting observation, particularly after what the delegate said a month ago, standing at that podium. And I'm glad this is going to get out to the public. Personally, I like street checks. My community, they like it too. Someone's helping around a fish sanctuary, and there's no fishing allowed, and it solves the murder of a 5-year-old. That can only be good. We just got to, and I feel better now that it is not 80% people of color, because that would be a problem in my view. But when the population and the people who are stopped are not significantly disconnected, that gives me more comfort. It also, I like the public statement that you put in, that the chief says we do not train our members to participate in random, indiscriminate stopping of any citizen for the purpose of identification. There's another public statement on that. I like the where you pointed out where the courts have gone on this. Just give me a second till I find it. The law has long recognized that although there is no legal duty, there is a moral or social duty on the part of every citizen to answer any questions put to him or her by the police in that way to assist the police. And I think most people do want to assist the police. And it also says that there's an implicit in that moral or social duty is the right of a police officer to ask a question, even, in my opinion, when he or she has no belief that an offense is being committed. To be asked questions in these circumstances cannot be said to be depriving liberty or security. But more importantly, and I'm glad Member Levy raised this, because how does the public know that although a police officer is entitled to question any person in order to obtain information with respect to a suspected offense, as a general rule, he has no power to compel the person questioned to answer. Moreover, he has no power to detain a person for questioning, and if that person questioned declines to answer, the police officer must allow him to proceed on his way unless he arrests him on reasonable and probable grounds. And so if someone stops me, an officer stops me and starts asking me questions, I can simply walk away and I will not be arrested. Correct?
Correct. However, not you, but if there's a criminal offense, then you will have that articulated.
And you have the reasonable grounds
You're
at
under
that
arrest for
time.
theft, you're under arrest for taking that, whatever, you're under arrest for whatever the offense is, impaired driving, it can be break and enter, whatever the offense is. You'll be told, and then you'll be given your constitutional rights.
Okay. So in summary, thank you for this report. I think it's well researched. I think it tells a statistical story that may be different. And I'm sure that group may be back once they've had a chance to read your report, which is fine. We welcome them back to comment on it. But my observations are, this report doesn't play out that we're primarily stopping people because of color. And that gives me a lot of comfort.
And as I've said, it's a broad analysis. To get down to the granular level is going to be a little more difficult. That's largely based on what we have available on race-based statistics, which are fairly limited and predominantly under Stats Canada, because they have the ability to compel people to answer those questions on a questionnaire, which is not so invasive, that type of stuff.
And you have documented proof because in 2015, you in fact did a street stop of an individual who turned out, committed a crime later. You had the description, you go back to your card, and there's name, address, and you're able to make the arrest. So,
and as a tracking piece, because we don't track that on a routine basis, there could be a gap there to say, how many times are they linked? I know they're linked. I know the current cases, as I've said, which I can't even talk about because it has before the courts. I know what's going on. So there's utility in it. In my perspective, if I solve one Zhang homicide, and certainly from a public perspective, it's egregious. You've got the death of a child. I mean, I know that's an extreme example, but it's the case.
and just to follow up on Member Levy's question, how would the public know they can walk away if they want to?
Yeah, and I almost turned to legal counsel because he speaks to that issue. Obviously, that issue has been tested before the courts. Inherent in many of this case law is when are those rights triggered? When is the obligation of the officer to do so? And the courts rule on those on a case-by-case basis. How do they know? The broad answer is the public is expected to know, and I realize it's a fairly broad statement, not mine, is that they have a working knowledge of what's required in the code.
Well, that may be a stretch,
Well, it's how the courts have ruled.
I can't read that document. It's so darn complicated.
Well,
I'm trying to get my head around it.
It is, and we interpret it, but at a fundamental basis, and I think it's where the courts have gone is, do people know theft is wrong? Fundamental assertion is yes. You codify it and say, can't steal stuff. That's a very limited perspective. But relative to rights, and many organizations and agencies do know what those rights are. We have that in our academic system.
But
we're
bad guys would probably know those rights too.
Pardon me?
Bad guys probably know those rights better than the normal
Without
citizen.
editorial comment, sometimes better than your average citizen, but they're exposed to it more often.
Right. Okay, thanks again for your report, Deputy. I learned a lot today.
You're welcome.
And I'll take the chair back and go to Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you, Eric. Great report. And, I guess where we started was that we were, trying to define what carding is and what street check is.
Correct.
Can you give me a little clearer definition of if there is a difference and what the difference is?
Sure. And I'll go back to the slide, actually, sir. Look at street check. It's police engaging with the community members for investigative purposes. And that can entail both, as you saw in the case law. Doesn't mean I'm entering into a criminal investigation. I'm investigating the circumstances of what might have happened. So I have to have a reason fundamentally to do it. It's not just arbitrary or random. Unlike the ride lanes, the courts have decided on that. We've seen the case law on this. It's far more specific about when the rights are triggered, what we can do. And I think in fairness in terms of how council presented to our members, they said, okay, here's what you can do. Also, here's what you should not do. Because we're trying to show both sides of the equation.
And so given that street check, every time you do a street check as an action team, you said this was only focused on an action team.
That's correct.
You record specific details.
Yes.
And those details are reflected in
Yes.
numbers that were shown here.
That's correct.
Okay? When it comes to carding, define carding for me.
We don't have a definition for that. We don't. A card is how it's captured. If you want to say the card is a street check, you could say that. We don't have a definition for carding. And there's many negative implications with carding.
So is that just an interpretation of how the information is recorded?
That could very well
When
be,
they say carding is You put the information on a card, you put the card away in the file, and the file you could refer to at some point later.
That's correct.
Okay. So given that, and given this information, I mean, you provided information for a 5-year period or 4-year period. Do you have information for a longer period of time?
No, because those physical cards were not collected prior to that.
Right. So this information that you have here is stored how and where?
It's actually in paper form because it makes it easier for the officers to complete,
Right.
particularly because they're walking, the action officers, and don't have their other electronic means to do offhand. And then it's entered into our records management system for searchability. It's the reason we've actually been able to gather these statistics today versus it would have to be a hand count prior to that.
Right. And so one of the accusations was that there was some specific targeting. You know, when I look at the kind of the 5-year trend, at least on the 5-year trend, it looks pretty consistent. So it's not something that kind of jumps up and down. So if you were targeting any particular group, you would see some variance. Is that a reasonable?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion.
So the question then is, and I think the question that was asked last time, and this is the area that confused me, quite frankly, is one said, stop doing this, but at the same time, provide us information in terms of what happens when you do. So I'm not quite clear on how we wade our way through that. So I see that there's value in collecting this information in terms of the way you presented it here today and tracking this. I'm assuming you would agree with that.
I agree.
To see if there's any anomalies that might happen. So if we've got a 5-year trend and all of a sudden next year we see in the black category it jumps to 40%, we could say we have a problem here.
Correct.
Right. And do you use that information as such? So this is
No, in fact, we haven't gathered race-based statistics before. This board approved that as an item at the last board meeting. The chief asked if you would approve that for this specific purpose. It's not a way we gather statistics, and it's inherent with a number of risks, which is stigmatization of people, how they're used, how it's interpreted. It's a contentious issue, and it's certainly not just in our jurisdiction. But to your point about the utility of changes in it, certainly would show that.
Okay, so I'm getting confused, so bear with me. So you're saying on the one hand you don't collect this kind of information for this purpose.
We do not do statistical analysis on race-based information, other than for this specific incident.
So I mean, you do collect the information.
We collect the information at source, but that's based on physical descriptors. So that if you link a person to a crime, the reason for looking at their ethnicity or physical appearance is to link them as a suspect potentially in an incident, as opposed to just for the reason of finding their ethnicity. It's not for that reason.
No, I understand that. So all I was getting to is that we do collect information about ethnicity, race, when you do a street check. So obviously, or you wouldn't be able to provide any kind of empirical information on numbers. So you do collect.
We do collect.
But you don't analyze it. You don't analyze it for the purpose of defining whether there is a specific targeting going on in terms of race.
Other than for this meeting where the board approved it and said, yes, go ahead and do that.
Okay. So my fault. I'm not trying to steer you anywhere.
No, I understand.
I'm just trying to be clear. So the follow-up question in my mind would be: Is this something that we should continue to consider going forward as part of? I mean, obviously, there's questions in the community. Mm-hmm. I think this answers a lot of questions, at least for some, maybe not for all people in the community, but for some. In your mind, is this something that we should periodically bring forward as a gauge to how policing is done and how street checks are being performed, and whether or not there's a variance in targeting on a regular basis for the community at large to know and understand? Would you think that has some value?
Not so much a corporate position as a personal position, and having looked at this both with regard to the studies that were done through the Community Foundation on Code Red, this comes with a lot of implications and dialogue about how is it going to be used, what purpose will it be used for. That's why I say it's a contentious area. I've wrestled with this on other boards. Certainly publicly it's been wrestled with. If the board would choose to do that, I suspect that you'll get quite a bit of feedback from a variety of interest groups and academics stating, here's some of the pitfalls, here's some of the advantages, here's some of the pitfalls. I think that you'd certainly get a robust discussion around that. Personally, to your point about how we're doing business, and quite frankly, I didn't know what this would show until we ran the statistics. So there's no predetermination about what it would look like. You're seeing it. We're being open and accountable. And yes, I mean, even for our purposes, not so much race-based, but we've seen a decline in the numbers. It's been pointed out by a number of members. That causes me concern. Why are we not doing the business? Are we getting to a stage where our officers are inhibited from doing their core functions because of the repercussions they feel may flow from it? Yeah, it may be a safer position, but I think back to the fundamental tensions, people expect us to do the job that they want us to do, that's dictated by the Act.
So given that, and I thought that we were going to get a kind of an analysis of the pluses and minuses of continuing on reporting on this kind of, which I don't see in this report at all, which I think is worth an exercise worth going through. So given where we are with this, I mean, I think this is great information, but I would hope that we kind of take it to the next step and report on and have a discussion about what the value is going forward in terms of collecting this information, analyzing it, reporting it to the broader community, and what the implications are. I think is a worthy discussion that we should have. I thought we were going to get into at some point. So at some point I would recommend that we take that next follow-up step. Just a criticism in terms of this information. It would have been so when I saw the item in on the agenda and then kind of heard the media asking about how do you feel about this? I had not that I was going to talk to anybody about it, but I had nothing in hand in terms of a report that I could actually sit down, review, spend some time with, and evaluate and analyze before we got here. So I guess I would be asking that we get this information beforehand so that we can have some time to evaluate and prepare. Having said that, though, the report is very thorough and very well done, and I think demonstrates. I think what the community ought to see and ought to appreciate is that we ought not have a biased service, that it ought to be unbiased as we can make it. And I think hopefully this report indicates that. But I certainly would like to take it to the next step and what the implications are of kind of pursuing an ongoing reporting mechanism here that may or may not have some value. So I'd like to kind of suggest that at some point. But thank you for this. This is very thorough, and you've answered a lot of questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have no more speakers. So, Chief, you want to add a question? I didn't see your hand. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to refer back to the chilling effect. Is there an algorithm that could be applied to something like this?
Because what's concerning is all of a sudden, or better yet, is if I can repeat again, it's my understanding it's at the discretion of the officer, correct?
Yes.
All right. So is there, how would that be monitored? And looking at getting back to the 188 and the 1365, how would that be? Who would be monitoring that? How would?
Yeah. Two questions. The algorithm, and I'm not a statistician that way. I'm sure they must have some formula, which is an algorithm that they can apply to it. It depends what your intended effect of the algorithm is, but that's part one. Part two is it's the supervisors who overview the street cards coming in. So it's up to them to monitor how they're being applied and what's being done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have no other speakers, so I'm going to turn to the Chief now for some closing comments.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the deputy and the team that worked together to put all of this information together for the. I think that it is clear that it is not ambiguous. Between 75 and 80% of the people that our officers interact with and stop are white. The Hamilton Police Service has been focused on bias-free policing for many years and commenced original training back done by the service, by corporate counsel, and by Senator Wilson in 2004. Training has been provided based on the Charter, based on the law, based on human rights, and more importantly, the Supreme Court of Canada interpretation of the law. The rights are activated upon arrest and detention, and the Supreme Court clearly tells us that all of our rights are subject to limitations. As was stated in the previous deputation, of some 300,000 contacts, we have seen by this data presented today here that that is just an inaccurate statement. It may be, there may be no legal reason for people to speak to the police, but there is clearly in the law a moral and social obligation to participate in keeping all of our communities safe. And similarly, there is no legal reason to advise people of those rights that are not activated until that arrest and detention threshold is met. We are working towards public safety, and that is our purpose, and we have a balanced and fair approach, and we comply with the legislation, and we balance the expectations of all of our communities and our members, and we act within the law. The incidents are left to individual authorities and individual case-by-case situations. It is not possible to write a policy for every circumstance that our officers run into, but they do outstanding work for our city and supporting Sir Robert Peel's principles that the police are the people and the people are the police. The outcomes of public safety over the last number of years have been very, very impressive in the city. And what is most important and that we are most clear about is that our officers do not activate any of their policing authorities based on race or any of the other prohibited grounds of the human rights codes.
Okay. Need a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Stan, second by Walt. All in favor? Carried. Okay, we'll move on now to, Reisenberger.
So I think there's another step, as I indicated earlier, and I think it's worthy of us to take it to kind of the next level, which is the discussion around the reporting of this kind of information, the implications, the pluses, the minuses, everything that Eric talked about at the end of the presentation here, I think is a worthy discussion for this board to have, this community to have, in fact, and so that we can, I think, have the fullness of this debate kind of flushed out in a final conclusion made that I think is going to be helpful. So I'm going to move that we ask our policing staff or whoever.
Senior Command.
Thank you very much. Senior Command. To report back on the very issue that Eric talked about, which was the pluses and minuses of keeping this data, evaluating this data, reporting this data on an ongoing basis, and the implications of all of that.
Would that include recommendations?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
absolutely.
Advantages, disadvantages, and recommendations. Seconded by Councillor Whitehead. Okay, are you finished?
Yep, that's my
Okay,
motion.
go ahead, Terry.
Just a question that's for clarity, and some of the great questions that Madeline asked. To understand that the previous reports received on action that was referred to, where the numbers didn't accurately reflect persons because we had duplicated officers making the same contacts?
Yes, they were gathered differently. These were verified through the records management system and the physical cards. The other checks were done indirectly, and yes, I applied on the basis of the stops that the officers did and reported on their logs. And it makes sense. If you have two people involved in arrests, they may run the rest together. We know that from the...
Isolate that out so that we're getting more accurate reflected numbers on that front. Thank you.
And to the Chief, are you okay with it? Any questions on the resolutions or any clarity you need? Okay, all in favor? Oh, sorry. Member Levy.
So in addition, perhaps what Fred said here, the board should develop, based on this and public interest and public trust, some guiding principles, policy around guiding principles around training, data collection. There has been some good work done by other boards. In fact, at a meeting of the board last month, Toronto actually put a policy in place. There are other boards that are considering this. So something for the board to consider, defining principles. I mean, we can't legislate. I'd like to see criteria that aligns with your training, guiding principles. The board put something like that together so that I'd like to have that in addition, that the board that. And based on that chilling effect, I'm really heartened by that that chilling, gave you the opportunity to reflect and or that moving forward, that we would really think, I'd like to have additional, that we as a board, practices that are out there, and that we put a policy. I mean, I don't know when the minister, and I'm grateful that he's going to be doing that, but I think in the interim, we could put some guiding principles together on how we feel those initiations should go, the training, and they're outlined in the Toronto Police. Mayor Tory made a public statement on and put on that we could draw from that as well as best practices.
Okay, back to the mover of the motion. Do you want to amend it, or do you want to wait for the recommendations to come back
Let's
before
speak to it. So just to be clear, I mean, I think we need to decide first whether this is kind of information that we want to continue to analyze, evaluate, and report on before we actually develop a policy. I think it's a worthy thing to do if we decide that this is something that we need to continue to analyze, evaluate, and report on. And if that decision is no, then creating a policy is kind of redundant in my view. So I think we decide this piece first, and then thereafter, if we say yes, we want to pursue on that, then we should define some policy. I just don't want to get the order wrong. I don't want to have it happen at the same time, because I want the first decision to then predicate what the next step would be.
Okay, I don't hear you agreeing to the friendly amendment then, so the motion will stand as read out. Councillor Whitehead.
So I would certainly support Madeline's motion as a separate motion. I think that it's not realistic to expect that, and that's why it hasn't been ruled out, that carding or street stops are going to be eliminated. I think there's going to be greater level of clarification and transparency and accountability in how those processes unfold. And I anticipate that's more likely what may be coming out of the ministry. So back to Toronto and what Madeline had indicated, I strongly suggest that street stops are not going away. I don't think that this is the direction that we're going to be given to the police services. It's certainly something that I wouldn't support. I see some of the merit for the reasons that were expressed here today, but I also see some of the pitfalls, and I want to make sure that we address those pitfalls through appropriate policy and core statements and values. So I wholly support the mayor's motion, but I think that Madeline's motion should be a separate motion to be voted on separately.
Okay, I agree with the mayor that we need that information back before we take that next step. So to the mayor's motion then, that we ask for pluses and minuses and recommendations going forward, all in favor? That's unanimous. Opposed? Well, it's unanimous. Okay. Do you want to place it? Okay, what is your motion? Microphone, please.
So we do some work as a board in developing, review some of the policies that are out there, the Toronto policy, and others that are other statements by boards on this issue, and that we develop, at the very least, a policy that outlines guiding principles in the areas of training, of data retention, privacy, those kinds of data collection, with a clear definition of public safety purpose.
My concern, Member Levy, is I don't think your motion is clear enough. We do some work. I think it needs to be that we develop, if you want this, we need to prepare a policy as it relates to street stops moving forward.
To address the aspects of street check.
Okay, and when would you like that to come back?
We could have, I think we could designate that public. I think we can do it. Designate time at a next board or following board where we look at it. Because I don't have a crystal ball.
I would like to see someone come back with a draft copy though first, and whether that's the senior command or.
Well, in consultation with the team. Again, there is a policy.
Just so the motion is clear then.
Okay.
Is that we ask the senior command to create a draft policy? No? Okay.
Well, no, it would be a board.
Oh, yeah, the board would approve it.
There is no training manual as such, so I would like to, and I think there are guiding principles outlined. So maybe we should review Okay.
I hope we can get the words cleared up.
Can I just make it simple?
Sure.
And it leads to the whole principle that's been espoused here, and that is that we request an information report. Look at best practices as it pertains to development of policy around carding, period.
That one's clear.
Okay.
I don't know whether,
Street checks. Street checks.
Street checks.
Thank you, Terry.
are you seconding that, Madeline?
I will.
Okay. To the motion then, discussion. Do you have a timeline for that?
Next.
Again, it's just an information report at this point, then we can evolve from that point
We
depending
can
on what that
develop
information says.
principles and policy. Perfect. Okay, that's good.
So should it come to us after we get the mayor's recommendations,
No, it'll be-
report, or at the same time?
It could be done concurrently because it already exists.
Chief, any comments on what your resources are to be able to put that together?
No.
And when?
Lois will do
I
it.
don't think that that's a direct, not listening to this as a directive to the service. This is a board policy you're discussing for the creation by the board.
Okay, so you're saying you want Lois to poll, just so we walk out of here clear. You're asking Lois then to poll other boards and come back with an information report on any policies it may or may not have as it relates to street checks. Okay, do you understand that now? Okay, I'm glad you made
Thank
that
you for
clear,
the
Chief. I
clarity.
thought it was coming to you, so. Okay, so further discussion on that. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we move on now to anybody have a declaration of interest? I do on 4.3, so I just want to declare that. And so I will not be voting on that item. And we'll move on to item 4 now, which is the consent agenda. First item is and I'll just go down and people raise your hands if you have any questions. Item 4.2, which is the minutes. And Madam Chair, Vice Chair, can you do 4.3 because I declared a conflict on it. Monthly service report. Just ask any comments or questions. Okay, I'll take a chair back. Seeing none, let's move on to 4.4. 4.4, which is the registration information to attend the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards Governance and Labor Seminar. Item 4.5A. Yep, go ahead.
In that correspondence, it struck me, so I don't know, it's a question to our budget staff, that what was expected. So it said it may not have been what was expected. So I don't know if we expected more than what came out or less than what was coming out with this increase.
Good, John.
Through you, Chair, we were expecting more, and it would be a shortfall of approximately $90,000.
Not necessarily good news. Thank you.
Okay, item B, C, D, E, F. Yeah, you can, if you don't want. You moved the entire consent, no, you had more questions. Which one do you want to talk to?
Yeah, so H, I think that this is the correspondence from Councillor L.A.L. Chantry, Chair, Ottawa Police Service Board, with respect to the Ontario Registered Pension Plan, which, if the suggestion of the ORPP goes through, could represent a 1.5% increase. I would suggest that it is a concern, and I think we should endorse the position.
Did you read B?
Right?
Did you read B? 4.5B?
Of the letter, you mean?
I said that in the letter. Exact same thing I said in my letter to the minister.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, then it's worth endorsing. I agree with you.
Okay. I'm going to quickly just keep going down in case there's more questions. I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, two new ones, which is R and S, which is the two letters from Ontario Police Service Boards. And if you notice, I started circulating to the board all the Ontario Police Service Boards correspondence. after I got my wings clipped a little bit, a couple meetings ago. So I put all those letters in now. Okay, motion on all the consent items. Moved by Mayor Eisenberger, second by Member Levy. All in favor? Carried. And opposed? Motion carries. On the discussion items, 5.1, Youth and Policing Initiative. And hire 4 students under the Youth and Policing Program Initiatives. Can I have a motion on that? Second by Walt Jesnewitz. All in favor? Carried. Armed Police Service Board Policy. This is the one dealing with just tasers. Microphone.
I mentioned that we needed an update on that in light of it was an amendment to the policy that we had already had, and I wanted that because we have given all of our frontline officers the absence of that from moving forward. I wanted it. That when I looked at that, and I thought that it was important for the board introductory note into that to say the Hamilton Police Services Board places the highest value on the protection of life and the safety of its officers and the public. I can give it to you after. Then lead into it and say, therefore, in accordance with the Criminal Code and the Police Services Act, the policy of the Hamilton Police Services Board with respect to the use of force, that. So I can give you that. I'm hoping. And also at some point when we get our website up and going, all of these should be there, and there are clean formats, cleaner than this, where it has, everything laid out, that we can put this on our website and that the public can see that those policies of the board, our bylaws, all of the policies of the service in a format, along with our procedural bylaw. So that's what I wanted to add to that policy, and thank you for the work on updating that.
So you moving it? Oh, Mayor? Mayor? Microphone, Fred, the public can hear.
It introduces tasers as part of the use of force policy.
It expands their deployment. It was previously tactical teams and frontline supervisors. The board previously, I believe, was approved full frontline deployment. Covers that board's direction.
Okay. And so adding to that board's direction, we're adding
A preamble.
So this is a board policy that you're following in terms of your direction, right? Okay.
Just amending it.
Yep.
Okay, so it's moved by Madeline, seconded by Councilor Whitehead. Yes.
Madeline, with all due respect, can we have public before the, that's probably why we did the taser. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so duly moved and seconded. All in favor? Carried. Item 5.3. Is there a motion on that?
Back to the microphone, thank you. In terms of board policy on complaints for members' code of conduct, I was certainly in a position to recommend that we consider the Toronto Police Service's approach, which I think is pretty thorough. We asked Lois to look for others that were doing that kind of policy. Toronto's the only one. So it's the only model we can actually deploy. So I'm going to recommend that we actually adopt this policy. I think it speaks to the very issues that we need to speak to relative to the workings of the board. It does lay out a pretty specific process in terms of how complaints are received, which is by written complaints with a name and return address identified. It identifies how the board will deal with it very specifically in terms of the complaint. It also sets out the parts of the act that actually apply to this, and also indicates that a decision's made at a given point in time on whether it's going to be done in camera or in public. And I would have to say that from my perspective, if we can do more in public, as we've all indicated in the past, that would be better. But on each and every specific issue, we can decide on our own whether or not we would like to. Sorry, did I miss something? Oh, okay. That on each and every instance, we can decide whether or not it needs to be a public issue, and my preference would be that more into the public domain, the better. So I'm going to move that we adopt this policy. I think it's going to be very useful for this board to adopt. And if I can get a seconder, I'd be happy to have that happen.
Okay, I don't see a seconder. What I would like to recommend, if I could, to the board, I've given this a lot of thought, and I don't like the fact that it's just one policy we're looking at. And I know the board has really struggled with this one and the media policy. And so what I would like to recommend to you, and you can give me direction of this, is that I would refer both those policies to our city solicitor to look at all the other boards and her vast experience in police boards, and have her come back with a draft policy for both. And then we can use that as our benchmark to start from. And change, amend, accept, deny. But I think it gives a higher level look by having our solicitor look across the province and her vast knowledge to be able to come up with a draft recommendation on those two issues. Member Levy.
I did my research on the conduct complaints, and basically, it just formalizes what's in the code of conduct. I mean, that's what this policy does in that way, is that we have Article 16 or Section 16. So when a complaint comes before the board, we deal with it. We determine whether it's a breach of conduct, and then we have steps outlined in here, which clearly gives us that opportunity to deliberate on. Is it of an egregious nature? Is it something that we can just say, don't do that again? Or is it sufficient enough that we sanction a person, we reprimand them, or we could take it to OCOM? What this does is formalize that. The only question that I have is, the responsibility of writing up, a formal and putting the name on. That will give us more work. But, I would verbal.
That's the complaint.
I have a complaint against you.
Chair, please.
Through the chair. If I have a complaint, they don't do that. Vote to get rid of that too. So if I
You have to change Robert's rules then.
Through the chair, if I have a complaint against verbal, what we've been doing now is we bring it forward, we itemize what it is, and then we deliberate. Without breach. Rising to that threshold, does it go to a reprimand or does it go? So, to write it up or whatever would give me more work. I don't have secretaries or assistants that work for me. And the other issue is I'm not in favor of doing these things in public. These things are of a personal nature. When we're discussing a board member, it should be of a personal nature. And so I'm not in favor of doing it in the public, because it clearly states in the Police Service Act that if it's of a sensitive personal nature, not comfortable doing that. So I'm okay with formally a policy that really reinstates what's in the code of conduct in statute, and we all follow it. So it's up to this body.
This, quite frankly, is exactly my issue. We've been beating these two policies to death for as long as I've been on this board. And I don't think it's reasonable, and it hasn't worked so far, to have any one member go off and prepare it. That's why I think turn it back to our board solicitor, give her direction to come up with a draft policy for both of those. She can do her research, use her experience to draft them, and bring a draft back to us for debate. Because I'm tired of going around in circles on this, on both of them.
So, you know what, if you want to stop circling the drain on this thing, then adopt a policy. So, you know what, every time a policy comes before the board, it gets pushed to some other agency to have another look at it. So I'm okay with doing this time around. Let me then recommend that this be at least the foundation of a policy that gets referred to the solicitor that she can look at as a model. Having said on the in-camera piece, you know what? This actually gives you the latitude to decide as a board whether it ought to be in camera or not. If there's a personal issue attached to the thing in terms of a private, personal nature beyond police service board issues, okay, fair ball. But if you're contravening the code of conduct of this police service board, I think it's a deterrence to know that that's going to be a public issue at some point. So this gives you the latitude to make that decision at some point. And report it out, and I think that's an appropriate thing to do. If you want to keep doing everything behind closed doors, okay, fair enough, but then let's not complain about the code of conduct issues that do happen that this board doesn't seem to be able to deal with.
Okay, so certainly the Toronto board would be one example she'd look at. Lois polled the others, and it's the only one that responded. We don't know if there's other ones out there, and I would hope Linda Board would know that. But we just need to get closure on these two things. So you have Terry and Walt.
Yeah, a couple things. One is, I understand you want to get the code of conduct policy approved, all of us, but we need to do it right. And the concern when you deal with, although I'd love to have everything in public, when I talk to lawyers, they'll tell you that allegations are just allegations until they're proven, and it can cause a lot of damage to an individual until they're proven. So I don't think it's a process that lends itself to an open session, because then individuals could actually be marked until that process unfolds, and that could have, as you know, Mr. Chair, and many others, it could have a real burden type effect on those individuals. So I think we need to flush those answers out. I think your suggestion is prudent. I would remind the board that I believe we did approve, and I'm going to ask Lois, that we had a consultant that has an expertise in the policy development that worked with the current director of the Ontario Police Services Boards Association in Durham. We, if I remember right, approved that consultant to come in and address policy development. I would suggest that they are the experts on this kind of stuff, because they look at it right across the country, not just here in Ontario. And so if you are going to move it off and say this is a priority, we want this to come back so we can further put that out. That Richard Taylor, I think, was the name, right, Lois? Tigger, yeah. So I think we approved that already. So I would suggest that that's probably the place to go, because that's where the expertise lies.
My only concern with that is I don't know them. I'm not sure the other board members know them. I think we know who Linda is, and we could direct her to go and use them as advice. I know it's money, but holy smokes, we've been kicking this thing around for 2 years, and we can't seem to get closure on it. So I'll go to Walt, and then I'm going to ask somebody to put a motion.
Okay, well, I'm back to the Tigger Schiller situation. We approved that. We were waiting to, I don't know where the status is on that, but we were supposed to have a presentation from them, and then it's been how many months? Maybe we should
I recall the whole matter's been referred back to the governance, and
No, this was a board approval. It was not a governance approval.
No, can you help us with this?
Governance brought it to the board, and then it was approved, and it was done twice.
It was approved within the minutes that the governance committee provided to the board, that that company come and provide a presentation to the board with respect to developing policy.
Okay. I'm open for a motion. Madeline?
So since then, in my correspondence with the Toronto Police Service Board, they use from time to time a policy expert, Andrew Graham, which we saw at the last meeting. I mean, again, we could go on and on. I think in terms of these two, but moving forward in developing other policies, we could look at having someone like Andrew Graham. I mean, he is the definitive expert, and he's helping Toronto develop policy. So there could be another.
Are you making that a motion?
Well, no, I'm just adding that it doesn't necessarily have to be that person. There are other people, and that's why to limit ourselves in having presentations. consult on that again, on where we want to go with the direction. So with the motion around your motion, whose motion, to send it off to Linda or to develop something, I'm okay with that.
Can I hear a motion? Anybody can do it. You're going. Well, I okay, so I'm going to turn the chair over to you. I'd like to move that the matter of the code of conduct and the media policy be referred to the board solicitor to prepare a draft policy on both issues for discussion, debate, and conclusion by the board. Jerry seconded. All of them, including Toronto. No, you didn't. You're the chair.
Oh, right. Okay. Now, all in favor?
Just ask opposed.
Opposed?
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we have some items of new business, and Member Chick, I think you have a memo before us.
Microphone.
I have such a stentorian voice that I thought it unnecessary in a room this small. But in keeping with the motion that you just made and was approved, I think it's important that we deal with the two matters with the full board. Correct. I'm going to start by offering my resignation from the governance board. And I'm doing that for the very reason that it's been kicked around for a long time now and nothing has happened with the media policy. And it has to come to the board anyway, and I feel that it should come to the board for debate and for decision, and it should be done by the board, and it shouldn't be that the board hears it from a governance committee that isn't making a decision but making a recommendation. So first of all, I am resigning from the governance board. Secondly, I'm putting forward that the media policy and the governance of that and other issues be sent to the board as a committee of the whole.
Okay, so I think we need two motions then. I think, first of all, we need a motion to accept your resignation from the governance committee. And secondly, you can place the motion then that we disband in the governance committee and turn these matters, all governance issues, back to the committee of the whole or back to the entire board. So I need a motion, first of all, to accept Stan's resignation from governance. And that's moved by Madeline, seconded by Irene. All in favor? Now, Stan, do you want to place the other motion?
I'm sorry?
You're going to place the other motion that we
Yes.
disband the governance committee and all governance issues be dealt with directly by the board.
Thank you. You said
Jerry
it better
seconding
than I
that?
did.
Okay, is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Irene. Discussion on Council Whitehead.
Clarification and due process and Robert's rules or Borneo's, whatever we use. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we need 2/3 vote as it was a board decision to set up the governance committee. Is that correct?
I don't think, Lois, the police have that 2/3 rule, the police board. Is that
No,
correct?
it's under Borneo's rules, and that's what we follow.
Okay. Lois, can you help us with that? Or Marco, one of the two?
I believe in our procedural bylaw, that's not a requirement.
We ran into this issue another time, Mr. Chair, and it's not governed by any other rules other than the board's bylaw. And I believe that the board's bylaw does not require 2/3 majority. The board's bylaw requires, I think the only restriction is that the matter under consideration not be something that was within the same calendar year. I'm not exactly 100% sure of that wording, but there is a temporal requirement. But there is no vote requirement under the board's bylaw.
So would this be in the same calendar year?
I don't know that. You have to check through the administrator as to when the motion to create the governance committee was made.
Is it calendar year or is it 12 months? I know that there has been legal opinion on this matter from administrative law, that when you support something at a board level at 50% plus one, to overturn that, there has to be a higher standard. I'm not sure what that higher standard is, so I just want to highlight that.
I'll turn it back to the board administrator. Was this committee formed in this term of the board? It was the previous. So that would not, I think, Councillor White, would you not agree that it was done by the previous board? It wouldn't need a 2/3 majority if we use that rule. Okay. So it's not necessary to look it up now, Lois, because it was done by the previous board, not by the current board. So this board isn't rescinding anything. Okay. So we have a motion then to disband the governance committee. Moved by
Lloyd. Have the board bylaw says, subject to section 13.10, after a question has been decided, it may not be reconsidered at a meeting of the board held in the same calendar year as the meeting at which the question was originally decided. That's what the board bylaw's exact wording is.
So I'll put the motion then. All in favor? Does everyone understand the motion? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Oh, is it two opposed? Okay. That's carried. Thank you. Just 1 second. Okay, Chief, any other business?
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the board. I would like to update you with respect to the Pan Am deployment. You have been in receipt, and as well as the public members, of many updates in relation to Pan Am and the deployment of our officers for the security of the sporting event. To date, the plan has unfolded as delivered. We have had no major incidents within the plan, and we continue to staff the venues within Hamilton. We are heading towards the gold medal weekend in both the women's and the men's soccer events. And at this point, I'd like to recognize the efforts of Superintendent Cancella, all of our senior officers, the entire planning team, and most importantly, our frontline officers for their dedicated professional performance of duties in putting the city of Hamilton really on the map in terms of this type of major sporting event. We have not handled an event of this order of magnitude or duration, and they have just done an outstanding job to date, so we're looking forward to the weekend's activities.
Okay, well, I had this prepared for later on, but I'll use it now. So, Chief, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you, the senior command, and all staff, sworn and civilian, for a great job it has done and accomplished for the community and the athletes enjoying the 2015 Pan Am Games. I realize it's not quite over. We got a little ways to go yet, but we just wanted to express our attitude for the great work. So congratulations on that. And we do have the weekend to get through. And my observation of the games is that, and I think we met what you said at our board meeting back in December. We don't want this to be a security event. We want it to be a sporting event, and it has been. You've been visible, but not overly visible. And I know you had a huge team working on this. I had the opportunity to visit the command center and see all the technology that you're using to make sure security is up to standard and that the public is protected. So on behalf of the board, thank you to you and the entire senior command and all sworn officers and civilians. Do the board members have any other business? Yes, Terry.
Chair, I want to make some comments in respect to something that I think the chief and you made comments on in the media in respect to the AMO report in regards to the high rising cost of policing. And I'm very supportive of some of the comments that were made, so I want to make it clear. I want to thank both the chair and the chief for their comments. But I want to highlight three really key issues that I see moving forward. These are facts put out by AMO. The average annual growth of police spending between 2002 and 2011 was 6.3%. This compares to the inflation rate over the same period of 2.1%. In other words, for at least a decade, police spending has been growing at 3 times the rate of inflation. One of the most important drivers in these increased costs was the police salaries increased by 40% between 2000 and 2011. and agencies with more than 50 officers, while the average for all Canadians in non-policing occupations increased only 11%. And the last one is the other main point is there's many more points, but these are the ones I want to highlight. Arbitrate and negotiate police wages increases from 2003 to 2011 have been in the range of 3 to 3.75% for municipal police services. By comparison, national provincial consumer price index increase over the period ranged from 0.5% to 2.75%. The OPP wage increase a minimum of 13.55% over 4 years, 2010 to 2014, with an 8.55% in 2014 to match other police settlements. And the last piece, just to highlight the growing weight, financial weight on municipalities, I thought that was worth highlighting. And I believe there's a chart that AIM will put out as well. Without question, Ontario, this is this chart here. It shows that Canadian average, British Columbia, Prairies, Quebec, Maritimes, Ontario is outpacing every province in regards to cost of policing. So I want to highlight the fact that it was comforting to hear that the chief is and the chair is open to some changes where it is necessary. It doesn't sacrifice safety. I'm 100% behind it. I've in fact, in the last number of years, addressed those issues. More recently on the Marine unit, in regards to looking at other contracted type services that could provide the same level of service without the high cost. So I want to thank both the chair and the chief for their comments and open to the AMO report, understanding that there's a balance that needs to be struck. We have outstanding police services in Hamilton, but at the end of the day, if there are services that don't need those high level skills, we need to identify them, as I believe the chief's already indicated he's done on some of the non-police services being done by citizens within. So I want to highlight that because I think it's important for the community to understand that this is a mounting pressure on this community.
Sure is. Thank you. We just got to deal with that interest arbitration issue that AIM has been working on for the last 3 years. Any other new business? I just have one closing comment, and I'd also like to congratulate the service for the most recent stats from StatsCan, again, which shows another year of reductions in the violent crime severity index, nonviolent crime severity index, and total crime severity index. So that's well done and should be very comforting to our citizens that we're still trending down because of the excellent work of our service. The next meeting of the board is Tuesday, September the 24th. There is no August meeting. And right here at 2 o'clock at Hamilton City Hall Council chambers. So I need a motion to adjourn. Is there any comments? A motion to adjourn. Stan? Madeline? All in favor? Carried. So we'll reconvene in camera in 10 minutes.